Please welcome William Schindler, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Washington College, and Atlantic Senior Editor Ross Anderson.
Well, Teddy's a hard act to follow.
It sure is.
We'll let you stay in your seats, though. I can promise that. Bill, you are an experimental archaeologist, and when I think of archaeologists, I usually think of someone with like a pith helmet and a spade, and they're trying to brush things off and maybe find a lost city or something, but that's not what you do. Can you tell me what is experimental archaeology?
Right, so if you can imagine what a field archaeologist, the kind of archaeology that you're referring to, what they do is they're excavating literally trash from the past, remnants of residues of prehistoric activities, and the past is inherently, the archaeological record is inherently incomplete. And the further back in time you go, it becomes more and more incomplete, and on top of that, the tools, the technologies become less easy to recognize. So what experimental archaeologists do is they help to kind of bridge that gap between discovery and interpretation. So as an experimental archaeologist, I would reconstruct prehistoric technologies like stone tools or prehistoric ceramics, high tanning methods, food production, and to try to understand how these technologies worked and how they functioned in a prehistoric society.
And so that sounds very interesting. So like you might make like the Olduvai hand axe, remake one of those and figure out all the different applications it would have. What has come out of this field, and how new is it, by the way?
Well, people have been trying to understand the past since we've been on the planet, certainly. Sure. But there were attempts at what we would define as experimental archaeology, certainly in several hundred years ago, and there's some models for this, but it really started to kick off again in the 1970s in both Europe and in the US, and it was reinvigorated in the past 10 years, and it's been a valuable teaching and research tool to connect not only archaeologists with the past, but also students and the public as well.
What does a dispute in your field look like? Like I'm picturing for when a paper gets reviewed, are people like trying to no, that's not how you throw a spear. You do it like that. Like how does that work?
Well, so actually, I've seen people almost go to blows at conferences for such a dispute. Unfortunately, most of the people that have these disputes are well armed and understand how to make great weapons. But these kind of disputes may seem like minutia. To somebody just looking from the outside, but all of these technologies, the first technology that humans developed looks like dates to about 3.5 million years ago. And, humans, this may come as a surprise, I think, are the weakest species on the planet biologically. We have certain members of our species that are certainly strong and certainly fast, but compared to other animals on the planet, we can't compare. So we started to develop technologies 3.5 million years ago that allow us to overcome these inefficiencies or limitations. And the first one of these is a stone tool technology 3.5 million years ago. And everything about, that's what we do. We interact with our environment, and that interaction is enhanced or changed because of these technologies. Even the simple ones transform this relationship. So these little tiny things, they may seem like minutia disputes. They're disputes over minutia, but how a stone tool was fashioned, how it was used, why it was discarded, how a pot was made or decorated, these things can tell a lot about the culture and the people that made and used them.
Now, I understand you teach a class where you have college students actually working through some of these techniques, and it exposes them to ways of life that might be quite alienating to sort of like the young millennial user of a smartphone. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do in this class?
Sure. So I teach at Washington College. It's a small liberal arts college on the Eastern Shore, and it's a fantastic place to work because they really support and encourage all sorts of diverse teaching and learning. And mine is certainly different than most. But my approach is I call it sole authorship. So students are engaged entirely from start to finish to answer questions in their teaching. They offer their own education, really. And most of these learning experiences, whether it has to do with archaeology or technology or even food, are rooted in the past. And these students, some of the kinds of things that they do are, again, start to finish completely. They'll quarry rock. They'll fashion stone tools in the same way people in the past did, in some cases millions of years ago. They'll use that tool to butcher a deer start to finish. Then they'll tan those hides, and then they'll actually make clothes that they'll use in another class in the summer where we go to Denmark and interpret what Stone Age life was like in an open air museum. And these, it may seem extreme, but these are the kinds of things that our ancestors have done, for literally millions of years in some cases, and it connects us all as humans. No matter who you are, no matter your age, your sex, your gender, your political affiliation, we all relied upon these same exact technologies for literally millions of years to get to where we are today. And it really connects us and connects us to each other and connects us to the environment in the past in some really meaningful ways.
It seems to me like there's almost a sort of cultural hunger lately. You see this in the paleo diet, where people all of a sudden are really interested in there's almost a profound longing for going back to that particular period, as though you're going to recover something essential about what it means to be human, and during a time when many people feel alienated by technology. Do you see that? Like, are students just sort of abnormally enthusiastic about this?
Yeah, sir. Abnormally, caught me for a moment. Yes, certainly they're drawn to it. They what's fascinating is in many cases these students are coming from places where this wasn't a part of their life growing up. Although on the other hand, I teach on the Eastern Shore, so things like hunting and fishing and trapping and being in the outdoors is a common thing. But there's certainly students in class where it's definitely brand new. But they're drawn to it. I mean, across the board, no matter what their major, no matter what their interests, this is something that they do seem romantically drawn to, and it's great. One of the vehicles that I like to use to teach, which I think is a meaningful, experimental archaeology is a wonderful teaching tool. It's a wonderful research tool. It's a wonderful way for places like open air museums, like Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, for example, to connect people with their past or their history. But one of the things that I've been pushing for lately is to take it to the next level. The way we've taken anthropology years ago and applied it, sort of an applied anthropology way to solve real world problems today, we're doing the same thing with experimental archaeology now. And one of the great ways to do it is, you mentioned the paleo diet, is through food. The idea that we started modifying our environments 3.5 million years ago, and at the same time, we also drastically changed our diets. And if you look from 3.5 million years ago to today, every major technological milestone impacted our diets, which in turn impacted us biologically and culturally. So what we are today, everything about us now is a product of 3.5 million years of technological change and dietary change. And one of the things that I'm pushing for now is to use that information to better understand where we should move forward. And one of the biggest issues today facing us is human diet and health. And this experimental archaeology can really help in that regard.
What else so you're someone who has kind of an uncommonly long view of the history of human technology. And when you look back, like when I think about the technology that's come about in my lifetime, I think about the internet, I think about smartphones. For you, when you look back at the history of human technology, what are the standout tools? What pushed us forward just by leaps and bounds compared to other things?
Well, obviously the first one, stone tools, are even though it sounds very simple, you take two rocks, certainly one made of a particular type of rock with certain qualities, strike another rock and create a sharp edge. That was transformative. I mean, that was the first time that we could overcome the limitations of our nails or our teeth, or in some cases, just even pounding a rock against a nut. That before you had that rock to crush that nut and open it, that was a food source that was unavailable to you. So stone tools, the ability to cut, the ability to butcher, there have been sites found dating to 3.5 million years ago where they're butchering sites where several species of animals with butchering marks on the bones themselves found in the same place. The ability, we weren't hunting at that time, but we were scavenging, and certainly the animals that killed the animal that we wanted to get at were coming back for that food. So to take that food and to cut it up and be able to bring it back to where the elderly or the sick or children were to share that food was transformative. Fire 2 million years ago, the biggest jump in brain size in our evolutionary past, happens at the same time that we probably invented fire and could cook food for the first time and make it safe and increase nutrient density. So those two were the biggest.
Walk me forward a little bit in time. So as you move into the historical era, obviously there are, by definition of the historical era, there are written records that may suggest how specific technologies were used. But then others, and I'll butcher the pronunciation of this, but like the Antikythera mechanism, which was like a sort of clock-like astronomical instrument in Greece, like is experimental archaeology being used for more modern eras? Are there, like the butter churn, we know how that works, but are there other things that from the last 2,000 years that people are puzzling over?
Oh, sure. A lot of experimental archaeologists around the world are focused on prehistoric technologies, and I think one of the main reasons is because we have many, many questions about them that are not easily answered through historical documentation. But historical documentation only tells often one side of the story and represents certainly just a segment of the population that can read and write. So yes, there's a lot of historic experimental archaeology being done because we do still have a lot of questions.
You mentioned food as being one place where we, given that we know that we have all kinds of problems in our food system, are there what can we learn from the Paleolithic? Like when you're doing this research, do you think, obviously it's not, oh, I need to bring these techniques forward into my, into a modern supply chain world, but what have you drawn from these people?
Sure. Well, there's two projects I'm working on now that I think are very telling in this regard. One, we are creating at Washington College what we're calling the Eastern Shore Food Lab, and the focus there is to take lessons from the past and find ways to incorporate them and make them relevant and meaningful in the modern world, and empower people to take this information and connect with their past, with their food, with their environment, with each other in some very meaningful ways. And right now I'm currently on sabbatical in Dublin, working on a joint project between Washington College, UCD Dublin, and Odeus Foods, where I'm working to do just that and inform myself and conduct research. And the idea is I'm working with foragers and hunters and fishermen and trappers and fermenters and top Michelin star chefs all over the world to try to find ways to fuse this. And the takeaway message, I think, to answer your question more directly, is if you look at the way the decisions people made in the past for 3.5 million years, up until about 15,000, I'm convinced that the focus, the main thing on their mind was to get the most amount of nutrition with the least amount of work. And they focused on nutrient density. Almost every technology developed in the past had to do with something to do with food, and almost every one of them had to do with increasing diet breadth, variability, and also increasing nutrient density. And it's the exact opposite to what we do today. I mean, modern Americans, we want to eat all day long and not get fat. I mean, that's the purpose. So we seek out nutrient-free foods, and that is a complete paradigm shift. And I know in a world of obesity and coronary heart disease and the other kind of issues that we have, the last thing you think I would be talking about would be trying to increase the nutrient density of our foods, but it's exactly what we need to do. That paradigm has shifted, and we need to get that back.
Fascinating. Bill, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.